Hello and welcome to the Two Ball Brothers and a Microphone podcast. This is your host, Danny Ryan, and I'm here with Tommy Ryan. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Danny.
Wonderful. Today is
It's nice to see sun.
Yes, it is.
The monsoons might be over.
Yes, your garden needs both water and sun, right?
Yes.
Two very vital, important.
Got a lot of busted tomatoes in the garden. All that rain.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Is that what happens?
The skins burst. Yeah. Sorry, this is not the Iron Mountain Organics podcast. I'll let you get back to
it. No, that's fine. That's fine. I really enjoyed our last conversation.
That was good.
It was nice. I think it was neat just talking about sort of the idea of getting behind why you're doing something. So it was a good deviation. But I wanted to get back to the book that we're reading in our book club, which is the Satya Nadella book called Hit Refresh. And we covered the beginning part of the book through chapter 1. And today I'd wanted to go through and do the next 2 chapters. And I picked out a couple of key things that hopefully will lead into some conversation between you and I. In chapter 2, it's a chapter called Learning to Lead. And he brings up in one part of the chapter that there are 3 stories that he said that they speak very directly to business and leadership principles that he uses even today as CEO. And the first principle is to compete vigorously with passion in the face of uncertainty and intimidation. So, it's even when it looks like things are dire, to go ahead and to go after it with passion. And I think for you and I, we have lots of discussions about persistence and the importance of persistence and moving ahead even when there is uncertainty in what we're doing. And I think especially from a leadership standpoint, I think there's some people you can share with about questions about what you're doing next, but then when you're leading a group of people, they want to feel confident in what you're going after as well.
Yeah, that persistence is very key. I think it's a component that you need to have as a business owner, as a leader. Is without that persistence, you're not going to survive, because you're going to have the ups and downs, and you need to stick to the story of what your company is about. It's easy to panic and scramble for things, and sometimes you have to suffer some short-term loss, but overall, sticking to your story allows the long-term health, I think, of an organization.
The second one was a story about the principle of the importance of putting your team first. I think for us, this is where humble confidence, where we talk about that quite a bit. And, putting others in front of yourself, I think with the value of teamwork, that's important for this. But just like how the story is basically some guy was very talented, but it screwed up the situation. And how I think for us it becomes, we recognize where we're in a unique position as a consultant, that if we come into this environment and we act like we know it all, that we could actually make the situation worse, and we're not coming up with the best solution for the client. We have to come in with listening and really trying to reflect on what they're doing, and not provide an environment of intimidation where we know everything and you don't, and also within the culture of Threewell, where people feel confident to ask questions, and how important that is.
Yeah, and I think that has been important for us, is creating the greater team, not just the team that's the Threewell folks that make up a project, but looking at the overall team, making the client as a team member for that effort, and doing things like retrospectives. We do that with our customers, and it's almost become a standard practice that we include in every sprint review, which is technically you don't need to, or maybe you shouldn't have retrospectives every single sprint review, but we value it so much to make sure we stay on track to the expectations and to make the small adjustments that a team needs to recognize along the way. And that could be things that are going well that you need to reaffirm that, yes, we like this. Let's continue to do this. Mm-hmm. Or, this doesn't seem to be making sense. And it might not come up in any other forum except for let's stop and do a retrospective. Let's look at what we should stop doing or start doing that is going to make the project better. And then I think we bring that beyond the project into the leadership of the company, where we have what we call leadership reviews, and that is taking the key stakeholders, maybe even business sponsors that are not in the project day to day, and have that heart to heart, maybe once a month on a project that lasts 3 months or 4 months, and say, are we happy with where things are going? Let's look at the status of things, and let's make decisions as leaders to make sure we can support the team that's implementing the project, that we're breaking down the barriers to success, and we're really making sure we address systemic issues that maybe can't be taken care of in a daily stand-up or a sprint review.
Awesome. The third story he has is about essentially coming in and getting into a situation where he needed to give him his confidence back, and something where even though maybe optimized for that day, he would have made a different decision. He recognized over the course of the season that he needed to be effective the entire season, and he was empathetic to a situation. So he maybe wasn't optimized on that day, but gave him the chance to build his confidence back, and how important that is. The next part that I wanted to go through was about in the learning to lead, where the 4 essential skills to building an online cloud-based business. Him recognizing that in order for him to lead, that he was going to be taking them to a different place than they had been before. And some of the things that he picked up, and I think a part of this is just his transition over to focusing in on, he was leading up the things with Bing and what he had learned with transitioning over to a different type of business. The first was he knew a lot about distributed computing systems, but he had to relearn things because of the cloud. So he had to basically let go of a lot of the things that he had traditionally picked up and be willing to understand a new type of business.
He's willing to do JavaScript. Is that it?
Yeah. Move over to subscription, and instead of getting paid big money in large sums, is moving over to subscription stuff as well. I'm sure that was part of it as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then the second part of this is he had to become great at consumer product design. So they had to really understand how could they needed to take care of 2 sides of the business of advertising along with the business of attracting consumers as well. And that sort of gets into the next part of this, the economics of a new online business. The one side are the consumers who go for great search results, and the other side are the advertisers who want their businesses to be found. It's interesting with this because I sort of, he's talking about learning to lead, and he's getting into basically getting into Google's business, right? And the situation of having to lead in an area where they're coming in as second place.
Right.
And how many times does Microsoft, where they're coming into a situation, the traditional thing for Microsoft has been, if they see an opportunity for $1 billion business, they'll go after it. But if it's not that way, they're not. So they'll let other people go after things, but as soon as they find a business worth going after, they go after themselves. And does that excite me? No, because you want somebody creating these new economic models and coming in and not trying to reverse engineer what someone else has done. but I think is sort of it's the nature of Microsoft's business.
Yeah, I think it is trying to commoditize things that become enterprise needs, and so, and that speaks to the scale of what is the business opportunity, and doing it in a way that promotes a partner community, that there's we're going to go after the big things, we'll create the frameworks, and come with us, and we can address this market and do it with enterprises that have confidence that we're there for the long haul. And there's a certain amount of enterprise that needs to be able to support legacy and have a predictable path of life cycle, and sometimes that is counter to innovation. I mean, sometimes innovation is, there's a lot of pivoting, there's a lot of leaving things behind. People complain about some of the things with Google where they start something and then they let it die and don't support it. And so it makes it harder for, say, the enterprise to say, I'm going to, pick this, and I have confidence that there's going to be support for it, that there is a life cycle, that Microsoft has some, or my software vendor of choice has a standard plan for sunsetting something, that 10 years after it's announced, that's when I have to be off of it, and I've got the time to do that, versus there's no announcement and it just totally gets dropped.
Yeah.
Now, Microsoft will put a lot of competing strategies like we see with To-Do and other task management or wiki management, all those things. But there is at least a subset of those that there is a backing, after it gets its initial traction, that Microsoft is behind that. So I think that is, in a sense, a burden to that can get in the way of trying to create something new and innovative, because I think that new and innovative requires a lot of failure, a lot of trying and failing. I don't look at Microsoft as necessarily being innovative, but when you see things like HoloLens, you see things even like a Teams, you say, wow, that's nice. It's nice. It's refreshing to see something that is, out there trying to blaze a trail. Now, Teams is not necessarily like that. I think Teams has been more of a surprise of getting it right early with software. HoloLens is more of, okay, there's not a market yet there, but we want to be one of the first, versus waiting and jumping in a lot later, like cloud. They're not first in cloud. You've got Amazon, you got Salesforce, you've got Google. Those are all were mature cloud companies before Microsoft got involved. But in the augmented reality, mixed reality, those are things I think Microsoft is trying to chip away at early.
I think some of the things you're hitting on are important, because I think the idea of we're not going to be developing things and dropping them has to do with trust. Like, can I trust this company? That's right. I think that and you could, I could probably sit on both sides of the fence with this and say, I think their overall ambition is to be a trustworthy company, so that when they go out with a product, they stick with it. And I think their goal is to, if they go out into mature markets, then there's a higher probability that will stick around. Like, even, you mentioned Teams, it's a reaction to Slack. There's each of the sort of the different businesses that you look at for them,
they've let the market mature.
They've let the market mature before they jumped into it. And then either they've tried to acquire it, and if they couldn't acquire it, they tried to do it themselves. And so I think that's their model, is looking at seeing which types of applications or which types of platforms are maturing, and then going after it, and commoditizing it, I guess, going out, having an alternative out there to it's good for competition for there to be 2 or 3 players that where you do see people pushing each other, especially the larger organizations. Right now, I would say more and more, like when we were reading through this, I think we all sort of were talking about sort of where is computing today and what's coming next. I think I'm starting to see how much I'm involved with voice. I mean, I was driving in this morning and adding to-dos to my to-do list on the car ride in, and then setting up reminders and doing and interacting with my computer all through the voice, and just sort of seeing, well, that's part of what's coming. And then the HoloLens, I think they're trying to get ahead of what's in get what is the next thing that's coming after this. And it's interesting. It's fascinating for me to see. I wonder, I would have loved to have been in on the conversations, I think, with some of this where they did drop Windows Phone. Because that was I mean, I think there were a lot of people who want to have a third alternative to Android and iOS and having something else out there.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see that, because I see them also, where mobile is so important to them. I guess they look resource-wise, let's just get the software on all these devices and consolidate and really focus in on that. But then I think recently I've seen, there's the announcements for like the Surface Go, which is it's getting small.
Right.
The devices are getting smaller and smaller, and there's a point in which you're seeing them actually go back after, I think, what they originally had not tried to go after. I want them, with our business and collaboration, productivity, I want to see them really nail that and focus in on that, because it has to do with their mission, which is empowering people. And I understand they need all the hardware things get them into probably pushing where devices are going. But all right, I'm going to jump off my soapbox here. But I think it's interesting to see where they stand. And again, yeah, you're absolutely right with going after mature markets with a partner ecosystem, and that partner ecosystem brings the last 20% to a solution. This is the same. This is very much in Microsoft's DNA and has been that way for a long time. So how do they apply that model to new mature marketplaces out there? So I know I want to jump in and I want to hit one section of the next chapter, which is chapter 3. And I'm going to read this out to you, and let's just have a nice little conversation about this, and wrap this baby up. He says, this is on 76, page 76. He says, I became convinced that the new CEO of Microsoft needed to do several things very well right away during the first year. And I've got a nice little bulleted list here of things he wanted to go after during the first year. First is to communicate clearly and regularly our sense of mission, worldview, and business and innovation ambitions. The second is to drive cultural change from top to bottom and get the right team in the right place. The next is to build new and surprising partnerships. He definitely did that, in which we can grow the pie and delight customers. Be ready to catch the next wave of innovation. I think this is getting into some of the things we're just talking about. Next wave of innovation and platform shifts. Reframe our opportunity for a mobile and cloud-first world and drive our execution with urgency. Then the last one is stand for timeless values and restore productivity and economic growth for everyone.
Yeah, that middle one, we're getting the right people, and it reminded me of good to great, getting the right people on the bus. Mm-hmm. Surrounding yourself with the right leadership that creates the balance that you need to power the organization. And I think that's key. We're constantly trying to look at that and have the right balance of ideas and talents and strengths.
Would have been interesting to hear him because at this sort of level with each one of those is to drive down to the next level. So like, what am I doing to do this? Because you can have like these objectives, but then the objectives need to be broken down into
strategies and
how
tactics.
do strategies and tactics and things that you can go and do. I mean, they're actionable things. For us with the 4DX stuff, what are the lead measures? How can he, if I'm doing this, what are the things that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis to drive cultural change from the top to bottom, get the right team in the right place? I mean, there's like, what am I doing in order to do that? That's the hard work, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's the difficult part of this. But I think if I reflect on these things, I think this list does not surprise me, which means he did a pretty good job. Like, this wasn't a list of things that reading through them as far as what he wanted to do during the first year. The thing that jumped out to me was these new and surprising partnerships, and the platform shift. Trying to reframe what our opportunity, the whole move of any device, anywhere, anytime. That was definitely he had to frame that up, and we saw through the years. I think we saw different examples of him showing up to a meeting and saying "my iPhone." I think floored some people to see that. I think him, we saw it like with him at the Salesforce conference, where he's there, in the middle of this conference, that and seeing that he's trying new different partnerships. Where they end up, who knows? And how they are today, who knows? But you definitely, I think he tried to, he's trying new things with that, and definitely did try new things. And I think people were excited about that. I saw a lot of people inside of having private conversations with Microsoft people, where there were a lot of people who were excited to be at the company.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's good to hear.
Yeah, it was. They were excited to have him as the leader. I think that was
because he's
really
mixing
important.
things up. So
he is mixing.
Some people are probably not excited, but it's good to see the majority are.
Absolutely. Well, we've gotten through chapter 2 and 3. We'll pick back up next time, unless something else comes up. Unless we want to talk about the garden again or something. Maybe you get the next batch of logos. We could talk about that again. Any Tesla tips from recently? Anything
well,
come up?
I got all excited this morning. There was a software update. I ran the update, and it was nothing in they give you a recap of release notes, and the release note said minor, updates and fixes.
It didn't have anything about that Elon wanted to buy back
No,
your car.
that wasn't an update.
He wanted to buy back your car.
That guy mixes it up in all different ways.
Doesn't he?
Yeah, that one of the things that it did show, it kind of reminded me of the last update. And the last update had speed limit control. It had,
That's no fun.
Yeah, well, it's got a valet mode that will allow you to control the speed limit and move it from standard acceleration to chill. That's the mode. So if you have it in valet mode, you punch it, it just slowly comes up to speed. So you don't see that Ferris Bueller's Day Off scene where the guy takes off in the valet and jumps hills. But it had some neat updates.
My favorite valet story about me is that I learned to drive a stick shift when I started valeting, that he never asked me if I could drive a stick shift.
Austin's been experiencing that. He's in his last days of valet life.
Yeah.
And he...
#valet life.
Yeah. He, as went into Maserati, I think, just yesterday, and he says it creates an interesting challenge every time you get into the car. You're trying to figure out, how does the car start? Because you have all these different ways to start a car today. It's not just keys anymore.
Yeah.
So he says that's kind of fun to figure that out each time. One of the features that's in there, that was in the last update, is cabin overheat protection. So within 12 hours of stopping the car, it will keep the temperature below 105. So it's kind of interesting feature. I haven't kind of dug into it to see why they have that. I think one, it keeps the car cool and there's less kind of damage due to heat inside the car of things cracking and stuff like that because of the heat.
Yeah.
Two, I see it as a safety feature for if you have children
or
you leave
pets.
a child or pets. You know, not that you intentionally leave a child in a car, but what happens when a child is left in a car is they die of heat exhaustion.
Yeah.
This, you know, could be a lifesaver for some kids that someone leaves a kid in the car, forgets about that, and then at the end of the day, they go in there and they just have a hungry, angry child versus
12 hours later. After a meth-induced bender. You get into your Tesla and realize your child's still there. All right, thank you. I hope everybody in Fulton County DFACS and Forsyth County DFACS are doing great. It's not like we would do this to our children. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there's stuff in the news where people accidentally.
Well, and I think it's more I think it's a key feature for pets too.
Pets,
that people
can,
you know, they know that I don't have to remember to turn on the air when I leave or whatever. That it has that overheat protection.
Common people just crack the windows.
Yeah. But what if it's raining?
Oh, it's great. Then they get. Common people don't have cars who they really care about if the rain gets in the car.
That's Forsyth County, not Fulton County.
Hashtag hick life. All right, well, let's wrap it up before I get into trouble here. I appreciate you doing this, Tom.
Sure, Danny.
Thanks, everybody, for listening, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.